In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this patchwork and quilted cosmetic case. It's more about the technique than the actual making up of the case, because the way that I'm going to show you is going to be how to get absolutely perfect points with your squares when you join them together like this in the simplest of ways. So this is a technique that you could use for homewares. It could be the centre of a cushion cover, maybe build it up with a border around it. It could be a block in a quilt. You could increase the size and make a tote bag. You could decrease the size of the squares and the project and make a very small pouch as well, or drawstring gift bags. The suggestions are endless really, aren't they? Inside the bag I've put some patch pockets, so it's really handy and helps to keep you organised as well. But again, that's something that you could add more. You could put zips on there if you wish. So you're going to end up making a bespoke little bag. Nobody else is going to have one exactly the same as yours. So go and get all of your materials ready and we'll get sewing. This is a 1-inch quilter's grid, so basically you've got a single-sided fusible interfacing that has a 1-inch grid already printed onto one side. The knobbly bits are glue and those are ironed onto the wrong side of your fabric. Now you can get different sizes of these grids. I like a 1-inch because with a 1-inch grid I can use 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, so I find it more versatile. And I've just got a piece here that I've cut to about 22 inches square. Obviously that's going to depend on the size of the project that you're making. What I've also done is to cut my fabrics into 3-inch squares, and I'm just going to arrange them on here but diagonally. So we're going to turn this around so that all of the boxes are on point and start to arrange. Now I'm going to need a row of 4, then a row of 5, then a row of 4 and then a row of 5, and we'll carry on until I've covered the entire sheet. So don't iron them on as you go. You've got time. You do this on your ironing board at home and arrange them as you see fit. So try not to get 2 prints exactly the same right next to each other. Of course this would look lovely if it was just monochrome, maybe black and white, or just using 2 colours instead of the around about 8 that I'm using here, but it's a great way of using up scraps of fabric as well. So these could be all completely different colours, and of course as many as you like. Now you can make these boxes smaller or larger, so have a play. I mean, if you're doing 1-inch squares, then the finished size of your little patchwork square is going to be 1/2 inch. So that will create a lovely effect if you're making something a little bit more delicate, maybe a small gift pouch or a makeup bag or even coasters and things like that. So carry on until that's all covered, and again I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and carry on until the whole area is covered. Then we'll take it to the iron and iron from the top. Be careful not to get the iron on the glue because the glue will end up on your iron. But press all of these down with no steam until they're all adhered. So that's how we're looking now. Everything's been stuck down. I've made this a rectangular shape. So again I've got my row of 4, row of 5, but in this direction I've got a row of 4, row of 3. You can make this as small or as large as you like. So if you're making a cushion cover, you may want to keep it square. If you're making a larger bag, maybe a tote bag, you may want to just increase the sizes all over. Now I'm going to trim this down. So I'm going to cut straight through the top triangles here. So we're going to cut this down into a rectangle shape now. So cut straight through the top triangles. And down the sides, and I'm just cutting through the point of the squares and cutting little triangles off each side. And across the bottom. And then the final side here. And I'm just going to line this up on my cutting mat just to make sure that it's square. It's not quite straight on this side, so I'll trim that down just a little bit. Now we're going to take each one of these lines where the squares join and fold it over, and you can see where the grid is on the back there, and just making sure that I'm folding right across one of those lines, and we're going to sew across each one of these folds with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So sew in one direction first of all, so just line that up with a 1/4 inch mark on my foot. And sew. So I'm going to do this with all of the lines going in this direction first of all. So again, fold over. If the edges of your squares sit exactly on that printed line, it's almost like a score line, it's automatically going to fold over. So there we go. So I'll continue with all of these and then press it, and then we'll carry on in the opposite direction. That's all the lines sewn in one direction, and I've pressed all the pleats at the back all in the same direction, and then we'll do the same in the opposite direction. So again, fold right sides together along the line and sew straight across here. So I've finished sewing over the grid lines and pressed it. Again, I've pressed all of those pleats going in the same direction. Just helps to keep it nice and flat. And then again, we can trim this down to make it square, because some of your fabric may have twisted a little bit as you were sewing. So let's trim off those little pointy bits as well while I'm there. And just make sure that the whole thing's nice and square. Then I'm going to put some wadding or batting on the back. I'm going to use a fusible fleece. It's actually Vileselene H640. You could, if you have some, use wadding, batting, polyester, cotton, really doesn't matter. Just give it a little bit of padding so that it looks nice when you quilt through it. So I will need another piece just the same size as this for the back, and then 2 more pieces for the lining. So I'm just using the outer piece as a template, so that I've got them all exactly the same size. And obviously with the lining, that can be a plainer fabric if you have any, so it's less expensive than a printed fabric in general. Now if you're using this as a panel maybe in a cushion cover, then you could put a border around the outside. I think that would look lovely. So just pick out one of the colours in your fabric and create, maybe if you cut 3.5 inches, so it'll look something like that. then you can make a lovely border that goes all the way around and just make it bigger. So instead of having the whole of this as a cushion cover, it could be like a central block with a nice big border around the edge. And of course that's a lovely way of making a block for a quilt as well. Again, with the border, maybe even in different colours, if you keep them square and then just join them all together. So I'll cut the lining sections in just a moment. Pop you out of the way. And we'll put the fleece onto the back. So this is it if you haven't seen it before. Again, you've got a knobbly side, just like with the interfacing, that's the glue, and this goes onto the wrong side of your fabric. So normally I'd do the large iron with lots of steam for this one. Have a look at your manufacturer's instructions if you're using a different brand though, because some of them prefer steam and some of them don't. With Vileselene, it likes steam. And it's one of those that doesn't kind of wrinkle up very easily, so it's nice to work with too. So knobbly side up on my ironing board. And I'm going to fuse both the quilted side and the plain back side to the back of the fabric. Of course you can patchwork the back of the bag as well if you wish. I'm just going to do the front of this one. Now it's got quite a few layers to go through here, so you may have to hold the iron there for a while or go over it a few times, because you imagine you've got your fabric and we've got the grid on the back of it, and the steam needs to travel all the way through before it's going to start sticking the backing to it. If you've got an ordinary wadding or batting that's not fusible, then you can use a basting spray like an ODIF 505 spray. Or you could just pin it. Right, I think that one's stuck. So we'll just trim the excess away. And then I'm going to put the fleece onto the back of the bag as well. And again, be careful not to get your iron on the glue side of the fleece, because it can mess it up a little bit. That'll be a cleaning job. So there's the front and the back pieces. I'm now going to quilt them. So on the front, I'm going to quilt up and down in between, or joining all the points of the squares together basically. And on the back, I'm going to draw the same diagonal lines as the patchwork on the front. So let's do this one first of all. Now I'm using a heat erasable pen. Do test with these first of all, because they're not really meant for fabric and we don't want to end up with any kind of bleach marks on your fabric. I've already tested this. My pen's fine. So I'm going to draw straight through the points of the squares. As an alternative, you could use a a water erasable or an air erasable pen. Be aware that those pens can become permanent when ironed. Or you could use a chalk. Or you could just go freehand. So I'm just drawing a line through the centre of each one of the squares. And across in this direction as well. Now it's up to you how you quilt it really, because if you wanted to stitch in the ditch, which is in effect just stitching over the seam lines, then you can do. There's no reason why you can't do squiggly lines all over this. I just think it looks quite nice and structured, having the quilt lines square like this. So those are the lines that I'm going to sew over, and then on the back I'll find the 45-degree line on my ruler, which is across here, and draw a line. And then I'm going to go 2.5 inches from there. Oops, and complete the grid all over the back fabric. 2.5 inches, because that's now the size of the squares on the front. So I've got all the lines going in one direction first of all, then I'll turn the whole thing over and draw the lines in the opposite direction. So again, just using that 2.5 mark on my ruler until the whole area of the fabric is covered. And back in that direction. Now I can lengthen the length of my stitch, because this is a quilting stitch, not a seam. So I'm going to put mine up to, let's do 2.8, and sew straight across all of these lines. There's my two quilted sections. Let's just take the iron over them to take away those pen marks. And on the back. And then I've cut 2 more pieces to the same size for the lining, and 2 more pieces to the same size for the pockets. So there's the front and the back, and then 4 more pieces of fabric. So for the pockets, I'm going to fold 2 of them in half, right sides together lengthways, and just sew those to make a tube. Now you can make these pockets any size that you like. So they could be deeper, in other words, if you wanted them to. Depends what you're going to put in them, I suppose, doesn't it? But it's quite handy if you're going to use it as a makeup bag, just to keep things that normally fall into the bottom of the bag nice and tidy. And the same with this piece. And I'm just using that 1/4 inch seam allowance again. Then let's turn these the right side through. Same with this one. And then we'll iron them. So I'm going to iron them with the seam very slightly onto the back, because it's easier than trying to get that seam perfectly straight across the top. So there's 1. And 2. Make sure if you have a directional print that they're facing the right direction. And I'm going to top stitch just across the top. So I think it looks nice. And the same on the second pocket. And then these are going to go onto the lining pieces. So the top stitch side is here, making sure it's nice and straight. And I'm going to place that about 2.5 inches from the bottom. So you can measure and mark that and make sure it's perfectly straight if you wish. And I'm just going to put 3 pins in here. And then we'll decide where we want our dividing lines to be. So I'm going to go for 2/3. So 1 line there, 1 line there, and that'll give me 3 pockets. So I'm going to use my heat erasable pen again. And again, you can measure and mark that so that they're exact if you wish. The pockets can be random sizes, they don't all have to be even. So I've got a larger pocket in the centre and 2 smaller ones each side. With my second pocket here, I think I'll just put 1 divider straight down the centre. So let's just measure those 2 against each other to make sure that the pockets are the same height, because I think that looks nicer. And again, a couple of pins. And this time I'm going straight down the centre so I can fold the whole thing in half and crease the centre point and then draw my dividing line down here. Then we're going to sew just a little bit down the sides here to hold it in place, like a tacking stitch. We're going to sew across the bottom and then we'll sew the pockets as well. Remember to back tack backwards and forwards when you get to the top of the pocket, because that's where any stress is going to be on the seam and we don't want that seam coming undone. So let's sew across the bottom first of all. So quite close to the edge. And then just a little tacking stitch in the side, just to hold that in place. So that's within the seam allowance. And then straight down the centre. So there's my 2 pockets, and we'll do the same with the second side. So pop these pins out and then back to the iron again to just give it a press and take those pen marks away. Snip off these little loose threads, make it look neater. That's it. And then we'll put the zip in. Now my zip is too long. I prefer them too long normally because then I can cut them down to size. But I'm going to put 2 little pieces of fabric on each end of the zip, and that's going to make it neater and less bulk where the zip section goes into the rest of the bag. You'll see what I mean in just a second. So I'll need my zip cutting down to, let's go for one of these boxes. So to 1.5 inches shorter than the actual bag. So if you're doing this, remember to move the slider so it's actually on the zip. There we go. Now I'm going to take a few of these squares that I've already cut. I'm going to have them all different actually. These are way too big, but it doesn't matter because again we can cut those down to size. And I'm going to put one piece each side of the zip, with the zip sitting nicely in the middle, and sew straight across. And I'll just fold that back and finger crease it. And again, way too big, but we'll cut that down to size when we fit the zip. Then let's take another 2 squares. Make sure that the ends of the zip are together. And in fact, to help with this, we could use a little bit of glue from a glue stick and just pop in the center like that. Same here. These glue sticks are really good. They are meant for fabric, so they're not going to gunge up the needle on your sewing machine. And the ink does disappear, so although it's bright blue, it'll fade away to nothing. Always use a glue that's been designed for fabric if you're using it with fabric. And then we can finger crease that back again. Now we're going to sew the zip facing down, so the slider is facing the outer panel, with the zip meeting the raw edge here. These bits will be cut off later. And just make sure that they are equidistant from each end. And again, if you wanted to, you could just run a little bit of glue along here. I don't tend to pin with zips like this. Alright, so facing downwards. If you want to use the zipper foot on your sewing machine, that's absolutely fine. A lot of modern machines will have a facility on the stitch width where you can move the needle over to one side or the other. I prefer to do that and then I don't have to change the foot on my sewing machine. So we're going to go straight across the edge of the fabric and then straight down the centre of the zip. Just making sure again that the edge of your zip is matching with the edge of your fabric. When you come to the slider here, if you stop with the needle in the down position and lift the foot up, move that out of the way, and then carry on sewing. I don't like to try and sew around those sliders because I do it with a wavy line. So we have that, and you can see the ends are nice and neat there as well. Let's do the same with the back of the fabric. So a little bit of glue if you like, not important. You know, don't rush out and buy one of these glue sticks if you don't have one, but they're quite handy. And then we're going to place the back of this right sides together, turn it over, and line up again the edge of the zip with the edge of your fabric, and keep these ends together as well. And then we'll sew. Let's just move you out of the way while we're sewing. Needle down, lift that up, push the slider out of the way. Always leave your needle down and then you can carry on sewing from the same spot. And straight over the edge of that fabric. So there we have the zip sandwiched in between the front and the back of your panel. So now we can trim away the excess pieces on these tabs. I just find it easier to work with fabric that's a little bit too big like this and cut it down, rather than trying to gauge the exact size and have no leeway for wobbly stitches. That's that. And now we'll sew in the linings to the opposite side. Make sure that the top of the pocket is facing the zip, and we need to sandwich each side of the bag around the zip. So pocket facing the top. I'm working on this side at the moment, so that's the lining side, and there's my zip in the top. So we're going to pop this right sides together so the zip is in the middle of the two pieces of fabric. I like to sew from the side I've already sewn because I can see where the seam is there, and I want my stitches to go straight over the top. So line up the edges here, line up the edges here. If you wanted to pin or glue, then again that's fine. And we're going to go straight over the top of that seam line. My slider's right down here, so I'll move that out of the way in a bit. So needle down, and carry on sewing. So there's the pocket that I've just sewn in, and that's on the back of the lining section, so we need to do the same here. So there's my zip. Make sure again the pocket's facing upwards, and sew from the side that you've already sewn. So line up all of the edges and sew over the same line. Feel the lump where that slider is, so again needle down, foot right up, move it out of the way, doesn't want to go this time, there we go, and carry on sewing. Okay, so there's the lining. Pockets facing the right way, and there's the front and the back. Now we'll start to sew those pieces together, so we'll need the zip open for this, and fold the front and the back right sides together, and fold the two lining pieces right sides together as well. And then we're going to sew all the way round, leaving a gap in the bottom here so I can turn the whole thing the right side out. Remember that zip's open. And when you come to the side bits here, you'll see it's like an H shape. Push that towards the lining section as you approach it. So I like to start sewing just before there, so I know that I've got everything lined up and square. And again, if you prefer to pin, if that helps, then that's absolutely fine. So push towards the lining. And sew. The pockets are lined up beautifully as well, so everything almost seems a matching. It makes a difference, doesn't it? Particularly if you're making things to sell. If you wanted to raise a little bit of money in your spare time, or if you give anything as a gift, it's nice to have it. It's nice to have it as perfect as you can, isn't it? there's the gap, so I can turn this the right side out. Again, just mashing up the edges. I think if you're going to give something as a gift, it doesn't have to be perfect, because if anything, that shows that it's been handmade. But if you're selling, then I think that's really quite important. Sew down the opposite side. So I like to sew in the same direction. So up to the lining, push it downwards. Then I've just got the bottom to sew. Right, now we're going to make the base a little bit square. It's not going to be a big boxy bag, but we're just going to square it off a little bit to give it some shape. So I'm just putting my hand inside, right up to the corners, and I'm going to open my hand so the side seam is sitting over the top of the base seam, and you can feel that. And I'm also going to push the seams in opposite directions. So the one on the bottom's going this way, the one on the side's going that way. And let's pop a pin in here. And do the same with all four corners. Now when I'm pushing the seams in opposite directions, this one is going that way, so I want to do the same on this side so I don't have a twist in the seam. It's not the end of the world if you do, it just feels a little less bulky. Let's do the same in the lining as well. So open up side seam over base, squish in opposite directions, and pin. And there's the final corner. So just checking the way that base seam was going. And pin. Now I'm going to take my ruler, flatten out the corner, and I'm just going to measure an inch from the point, not from the point of the fabric, but from the seam, where the seam finishes here. And draw a line. Actually, it's right where the pin is. Then I'm going to sew across the corner here, and we'll do that on all of the corners. So open it up, like so, 1 inch from the edge. Make sure this is square as well. So I can use my ruler with this line to sit it along the seam, and then draw down here. So this is a nice shaped triangle. And the same with the lining. When you've made a few of these, you can probably just sew this without measuring. You'll get used to gauging how far to sew. And of course, the bigger the triangle, the bigger of this line that was sewing. So if I'm measuring 1 inch from the point. If I measure 2 inches from the point, I'm going to have a bigger, squarer base. So if you're making something like a tote bag, you might want a bigger base than just a little 1 inch. But it might be an idea if you're designing your own bag just to experiment. Make a calico bag or a muslin bag, and try different sizes of corners and to see what looks best for your bag. Right, then we'll sew straight across all of those lines. And chop off the corner. Whoops. Same here. chop you off. And of course the same with the outer bag. Take those pins out. And chop you off. And one final piece here. Oh, that was right on a seam, so it was a little bit bulky there. Let's chop you off. And then this is why we needed to leave the zip open while we're doing this, so we can now turn the whole thing the right side out. So let's push out those corners, and you can see how I've got a nice square base. Push those bits out. And then with the lining, I have a hole. So if you pull the two sides of that gap away from each other, the sides automatically want to fold in, and then I can just sew the opening closed on my sewing machine. If you want that to be completely invisible, then you could do a ladder stitch by hand. Then we'll push the lining inside the bag. So, I think one final press and that would look lovely. I'm going to put a little bit of ribbon through the hole in the zip pull, just to decorate it a little. I need to make sure that the fabric's well pressed away from the zip. That's it. You could have top stitched around there if you like, but I like it. I wanted it to look nice and clean. And then inside, I've got my pockets that I can keep things to hand. So I think that's going to make a lovely gift bag for somebody for Christmas, for birthdays. You can make it up in Christmas fabric if you wished. Or just a nice little storage bag for yourself. So I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoy making yours. I'll see you again soon.